All right, and we're off. Thanks for being here, everyone. Just get right into it. Okay, so these meetings, just a review of intentions for these meetings, learning, communication, discussion, questions about, of course, EnviroDIY monitoring stations, but also overall stream monitoring in general and specific types of monitoring. We often talk about synoptic sampling, but we're certainly talking about other types of monitoring, such as what Krista is going to talk about today. Freshwater ecology concepts, data, et cetera. Data to action, something that the local policy and practice work group has been working on. We'll have a few updates on that today. Tools and resources, had a recent presentation on Model My Watershed, other tools and resources discussed here. And then, of course, other topics like conservation and environmental education. Agenda today, introduction, I have Stroud and policy work group updates. Krista is going to present on the EPA habitat assessment method, rapid assessment. We'll hopefully have a little time for discussion. The meetings are recorded. Those recordings are always found at this resources site. Meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30. Zoom link is always the same. Keep that for your records. Please be in touch if you have anyone that would like to be on the email distribution list for these meetings and for the monitoring network in general. Attendees in these meetings include folks from the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, as well as just folks working within the Delaware Basin. Sometimes folks are attending from outside the DRB. Certain topics particularly are of interest for that. Stroud Center is currently supporting this community science effort via the Delaware River Watershed Initiative and the Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds. There's the DRWI webpage. Seesaw, it's a DEP Growing Greener grant that's available for groups in Pennsylvania to receive Stroud Center assistance. Myself, Krista, Shannon, Stroud folks working on this, as well as other Stroud folks that are in support. Folks will often hear me mention Sarah Damiano, Scott Ensign supports, other folks kind of internally at Stroud. Master Watershed Stewards, Carol Armstrong, Joe Devis, George Seeds, and others playing prominent roles as facilitators in events and conferences and presentations. And then Stroud Center leads in DRWI include John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott. Primary goal from the Stroud Center perspective remains to support station owners, watershed groups in doing the monitoring that they want to do. Secondarily, the Stroud Center does analyze data internally, including the continuous data and kind of supporting efforts to develop tools and resources to help watershed groups and others do work in their local situations. So some updates from the Stroud Center, just a few here. Sort of just a little more detail. We are available for support on any number of different topics, including doing snapshots. A lot of different groups are doing those these days. They give a really good spatial resolution, fine resolution across a watershed. You can look up into little fingers and small tributaries of the watershed to really look into spatial variations. Overall project design monitoring methods, kind of being strategic about that, data analysis, interpretation, watershed education, plenty of other topics. So feel free to be in touch regarding overall, science support. Also, if you, have stories, things going on with your organizations and you'd like Stroud to, share those stories on social media, feel free to be in touch with Diane or me. Ian and Dave Manning are both out today. So I'm going to give the work group updates. Here's a list of current active folks in the work group. These meetings are taking place once a month for an hour and a half, first Thursdays of every month, 11 to 12:30 Zoom link. Please be in touch if you feel like you'd like to be involved in the group in any way. Short-term charge to basically just develop ways to communicate data, primarily focused initially at least on the data from the sensor stations, from the monitoring stations, to use that, in this data to action, format of working with municipalities, with municipal leaders to help inform and influence decision-making with regard to watershed management. So guidance documents, this guidance document overall sort of broad, engaging with municipal leaders document is ready. The temperature, using temperature data document is ready. We have one-pagers. We need to get more of those posted. And then we're finalizing this conductivity document. Again, other one-pagers for communicating with lay audiences, in meetings and such, presentations as well. We need to really kind of get some of those uploaded to the Manage My Watershed site, because we do have some of those kind of in relative working order. Here's the Manage My Watershed site I mentioned, where these documents are being stored. You can click into these documents, and then if you have an account, you can sign up for a free account, and then you can provide feedback on these documents or add supporting documents if you have other types of documents that may be supportive to these. You can upload those. And one other update, the work group is doing a session at the upcoming Watershed Congress this Saturday. Community Scientist Development of Technical and Advocacy Resources for Watershed Health. So we're going to be sharing, the group of us here is going to be sharing what we've been doing, sharing an overview of the documents, and hoping to get feedback, maybe spark some interest in the audience, and maybe find some additional collaborators on this work. Any questions before we move on?
Dave, what is the this Saturday? When are you presenting?
It is at we start at 10:15, Jim.
Okay, yeah, I had signed up for the whole day, so I'll be up
Cool.
there. But it's on the agenda for morning or after.
Yeah, 10:15.
Oh, okay.
It's the session 10:15 to 11:15 in room 217 at the Montgomery County Community College, South Hall.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Jim, the Congress starts before that, though, so.
The Congress starts at 8:30, I believe, or 8 even, actually, maybe.
David, there's a question in the chat that this might be a good moment for,
Right.
I think Fred Hartman, is there some way to submit by uploading of pictures for site sampling? Talked about that before. So.
Yeah, no, Fred, there is not a platform set up for submitting photos. Most of these stations are owned by individual groups and not by the Stroud Center. So, I think most folks are just providing photos like you're doing to the to the people who are kind of managing the stations. There's certainly potential in the future for us to link data entry forms for the stations directly to Monitor My Watershed, at which point hopefully you could upload photos as well as other information, potentially the information that is not associated with EnviroDIY stations, potentially snapshots and so on. But that is not presumably going to happen in the near future. It is on the radar as features that would be desirable to a lot of folks, but that is not currently available. So I'd say if you're wanting to share photos with your stream stewards, it might be worthwhile to talk with Kim about, you know, some sort of share file or something like that. Let's see here. Will the data form? Yeah, I agree, Fred. It would definitely be a good ad. There's a lot of features on Monitor that would really be helpful. So keeping the long term in mind, hopefully in the long term, we're able to really build Monitor out to be much more accommodating for different types of data. That will be, you know, make it much more comprehensive and usable. Let's see, another in the chat. Okay. All right. Anything more before we move on to Krista?
Oh, yeah, I did have a question about the Monitor My Watershed. Is that the data download? Is that working now?
I think it is. We got feedback that it was working, Jim. I would test it though.
Yeah, I think I did test it and it still didn't work for me. So
Is
I'll
that you
test
tested it
again.
yesterday?
What?
You tested it yesterday?
I think so. I was going to test it now, but I'll
Okay.
bring it up later. I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay. That
Do the
sounds
whole.
good. That sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to Krista? Flowing insights, harnessing habitat assessments for river monitoring. Krista Reeves is the water quality program manager at the Musconetcong Watershed Association. She's going to talk to us today about the EPA habitat assessment. So I will stop share and let Krista share her screen and proceed.
All right, so as Dave said, I'm the Water Quality Program Manager at the MWA here in Northwest New Jersey. If I can get my slides to advance, I'll show you where that is. There we go. So we're up here, one of the largest tributaries to the Delaware on the New Jersey side. We at the MWA, our goal here is to protect and enhance the Musconetcong River and the watershed. We do that through education, promoting historical and cultural values, water quality monitoring, other volunteer efforts, and restoration. This is an old mill across from our offices that we've been in the process of restoring that is open now for tours, but we're moving some office space over there and we hope to have open by this fall. Actually, it's been a long time coming. So if you're into touring old mills and looking at historical sites, please come up this fall and, you know, come have a look and walk on our educational trail. And it's a really fascinating piece of history here. Also, this is our River Watcher group that I'm talking to in the midst of COVID. We all have our masks on. River Watchers is our community science program here at the MWA. It was established in 2007. This is going to be our 17th year of data collection. At any one time, we have over 50 volunteers. We do HAB monitoring in our upper watershed lakes, macroinvertebrate collections, habitat assessments, road salt monitoring. We have stewardship programs for our sensor stations, and new coming this summer, we're going to start doing bacterial monitoring. And also this data is not just informing our work. We now have a pathway to submit this to DEP themselves, and they use this data to put together what they call the integrated report, which is the water quality report for all of New Jersey. So what are we talking about? What is a habitat assessment and why are we talking about it? You know, most of the time we directly talk about our sensor stations, the data it's collecting, what we do with that data. But today we're going to talk about what is going on around our sensor stations. A habitat assessment that was put together by the EPA is a quick and quantifiable method to assess the habitat in a particular stream reach. A stream reach is characterized by 100 meters And it involves assessing various physical and biological characteristics of that habitat to provide a rapid but informative snapshot of the habitat conditions, such as substrate composition, the vegetative cover, and the complexity of that habitat. Bar up here. So our EnviroDIY stations tell us what's going on in the water, right? It's telling us exactly what's happening with conductivity, temperature, but we see these readings and we want to understand, why do we see high conductivity readings? Why do we see big pulses of water every time it rains? Why is the water so hot when the station itself is in a shady spot, perhaps? We may understand why these things are happening intuitively, but how can we track that across time and space to make it quantifiable and then relate it back to our data? So these are the categories that are on this rapid biohabitat assessment. It's 10 categories, and they are scored based on a description and a metric value, right? So there is some subjectivity to this. Each category is going to have its own scoring, right? So each one of these 10 categories, like embeddedness, right, is going to say optimal, and then it has a description. It tells you what optimal means, suboptimal, and so on. And then at the end of this, you're going to get a total score, and then it's going to give you an overall score of that 100-meter reach to tell you if that's in an optimal or poor condition within that 100 meters. So what are these categories measured? What are we actually looking at when we do this assessment? We are looking at epifaunal substrate and available cover. What that means is there refuge and foraging areas for fish? Is there habitat for aquatic organisms, macroinvertebrates that live there? Embeddedness, the degree to which the boulders and bigger pieces of the substrate are embedded with fine sediment, organic matter, or vegetation. Velocity and depth regimes. This is that pattern of distribution, right? Are all 4 of these categories present? Is there a slow deep area, right? Is there pools? Is there slow and shallow regime there? Is there fast and deep? Do you have those big runs of part of that river? And fast and shallow. So each category for optimal, suboptimal, marginal, and poor is going to have a description. Let's just say, for example, you have all of the regimes, but you do not have slow and deep. So it's going to take you through those steps and say, okay, you've got them all except for this one. So you have 3 of 4 within this category. Is it a 15? You're only missing that only in one spot, or is it you really don't have those at all and it's going to be more towards the lower part of that category? Sediment deposition indicates the accumulation of sediment. Do you have point bars forming? Do you see a lot of sediment building up in places that wash downstream or off the land from other places? Channel flow status. That describes the characteristic of the river channel and the dynamic part of the ecosystem. Flow velocity, the depth, and the patterns in which they run through. Channel alteration. Has somebody come in and dredged for a project? Maybe they put in a bridge a long time ago that's not there, and they've put abutments in. Maybe there's gabions that they've done as part of a restoration effort. So you're looking for any signs of channelization or dredging. Frequency of riffles and pools, right? Again, a mix of habitat to understand if there's a habitat for fish, macroinvertebrates, and when the water is warm and low in the summer, is there refuge during those low flow periods, and areas for that sediment to build up. And then bank stability. The last 3 of these categories is scored on both banks, right? So you're going to look at both sides of your bank and assess it, right? So bank stability, we're talking about, do you see escarpments, large areas that have just sloughed off and washed further downstream? And then the habitat structure for preserving that water quality. And then again, for bank vegetative cover, you're going to do this for both banks. You assess the presence of healthy vegetation along the riverbanks. And this does include seeing invasive species. Yes, there's vegetative cover, but is it all mugwort? Is there a mix of habitat? Is there tree canopy? Is there herbaceous canopy? Is there the low cover of ground cover? You know, so all of those mixes of type of vegetative cover. And then the bank vegetative zone. How far back from the shoreline does that vegetative buffer exist? Yes, maybe there is the bank vegetative cover and all 3 levels are there, but does it only extend 10 feet and then it's all parking lot? Or does it go back 90 feet? You know, how much of that zone is covered by that vegetation? And so this is what the form looks like. This is just one of the sheets. It's 2 sheets. And like I said, so it gives you a description for each one of your categories, right? Oh, go back. And this is where some of the subjectivity comes in. So maybe you have some channel alteration, right? You know, in the past, they dredged or shored up one of the banks with a gabion or with riprap and rocks. Or, you know, you see some people that have homes and they go ahead and they put in an entire wall because they have a patio out there. And so you'll see some of that being present, usually, like it says, areas of bridge abutments, past channelization, but maybe it was a really long time ago and it started to naturalize. And so, you know, this is where your experience comes in, or having discussions with peers comes in, or whoever's training you on this. You really get into a deeper discussion about the degree and subjectivity within each category that's going to fall, because an 11 obviously is way different than a 15. You're saying we're at the top of this suboptimal category, or we're at the bottom where it's almost marginal, and that's going to affect your total score. So when and where do you perform these habitat assessments? Most of the time, you're going to want to do this in spring or early summer after leaf out has happened. You definitely want that vegetation to be fully there so that you can assess the amount of cover that you're going to have, the zone of cover. It's really not a good idea to do these in winter. Before a restoration project, right? If you're going to go in and remove a dam, you're going to want to understand the quality of that habitat before you go and perform this and take out that dam, so that you can see the progress over time. Each year of an ongoing restoration project, you know, you want to do these consistently. We do macroinvertebrates every spring, so we just pair these together, and every time we go and do macroinvertebrate collections, we do a habitat assessment right along with it. Or if we're taking out a dam or doing some other sort of riparian buffer installation, we're going to want to assess before and after, and then in an ongoing manner, so that we can understand the trends over time. And then after the completion of a restoration project, a lot of times these are funded by partners or by agencies, and they want to understand the impact of the work that they paid for. And so if you can track this a long time and space, you know, you're going to be able to report that back to whoever your funder was. And then internally, you want to say, was this best management practice effective? Did we get a good bang for our buck out of this? Was it worth our time and effort? And then whenever your EnviroDIY is showing some problematic data, you keep seeing large pulses of conductivity, flashiness in your system when you're getting any type of rainstorm. And where would you want this? In relationship to your EnviroDIY, you know, as the water's moving downstream, you're going to want to ideally do your assessment within where your EnviroDIY station is, but towards the bottom of it, right? So if you're looking at a 100-meter stretch, you know, maybe your EnviroDIY is the last 15 to 20 meters of that reach, so that you're characterizing where that water and land is in relationship flowing downstream and being characteristic of what your EnviroDIY station is reading. You're going to want to do this away from the influence of other water bodies. If you have a tributary that's coming into your main stem that you're assessing, you're not really getting a full characterization of that water body if it's being influenced by another water body. You're going to want to do this if there's culverts, dams, bridges, other infrastructure below or directly above. You don't really want these to be in the middle. You're going to get a lot of channelization and influence from these structures, and it's really just not a good idea to have them in the middle of where your reach is. So usually at the very top or at the very bottom if you have anything that's going to be infrastructure-wise in the way. And like I said, you're going to want to do this in a 100-meter reach that's characteristic of where you're performing your other monitoring. You want it to be able to characterize what you're looking at. So how do you learn how to do this? If you don't already know, I know we probably have a gradient of knowledge around habitat assessments here. So you can come to places like, watershed associations like the MWA. We do habitat assessment training twice a year. We do it in spring and fall. There's the EPA Rapid Habitat Assessment Guide that's available online, or my favorite YouTube videos. I don't always want to sit and read. I want somebody to show and tell me, right? There's a link here that I'll put in the chat when I'm done with the presentation that goes through each one of these in detail. And so you can follow along with them. You can sit and learn. And then when spring happens, you can go out and start performing this. Usually it's best, like I said, with a colleague, with a friend, so that you can have these discussions around that subjectivity within each category. I find that these discussions bring up a lot of really rewarding parts of this experience. And, having long and intense conversations about what bank full means, what embeddedness means. Did you see this point bar formation and sedimentation last year when we were here doing things like this? What kind of changes have you seen from year to year? And then just discussing why those things might be happening. So one way to look at your scores is to look at your total score, right? And then you have several sites across your watershed. So this is the way to look at things spatially. So you give yourself, you put your data into an Excel sheet. I just did this randomly. So maybe, we're looking at site A, which is in the headwaters, pristine forested area. So we have a really good optimal score. But then we have a headwater lake that this water runs into, and then there's a dam, and then your next site is below that dam, and you have a really marginal site. You're not seeing, you're seeing a lot of embeddedness, a lot of point bar formation, sedimentation, erosional features, and so you have a really low score. And then it goes through, a recovery period, and it's suboptimal, but it's not terrible. And then it goes through an area of high development, lots of impervious surface, and then that score comes back down again. You're just seeing a lot of categories that bring this down. So this is, a way to look at your watershed in a spatial manner. Another way to use these habitat assessments is to look at them across time. So let's say we look at site A, and we look at it across a span of 4 years. And we have all of our categories broken down, and we create a chart, and we want to understand, where are we still lacking at this site? Where are we still seeing the influence of runoff, stormwater, things coming across impervious surface, so we can understand where maybe some restoration efforts are needed. So we plot this out, and we can see that most of this looks pretty good, but where we're really, lacking here is in our vegetational zone, right? We see that the zone is really low, that the bank vegetation is pretty poor, and that that in turn leads to poor bank stability, right? There's no trees, there's not a lot of vegetation holding on to the bank. So we're seeing a lot of erosion happening and a lot of bank instability happening. So maybe this is a site where most things are going well, but you want to have some sort of concerted effort to do a riparian buffer planting or a tree planting. And, you know, it can help inform those restoration efforts. So to summarize this, you know, in terms of our EnviroDIY and why we would want to put, you know, a station or do a habitat assessment around our station, we want to understand that land use and how it's affecting that water quality. It's going, like I said, it's going to inform our restoration efforts. A lot of us do this and have stations, and we're doing these salt snapshots, and we want to understand, well, yes, we want to control the pollution at its source, right? So we want to go and talk to our EACs and the DOT and our planning boards to try and reduce the salt. But in the meantime, this is going to say, okay, well, this is coming off of these parking lots. Maybe we can get this business to put in a plant, you know, do a planting. Maybe we can go for a small grant and fund something along the lines of a buffer zone, put in or increase a buffer zone. Also, it's going to provide us with a holistic perspective on our river and the ecosystem. That's going to enrich the effectiveness of our sensor stations for monitoring. We're going to have a deeper understanding of what's going on at our sites. It's great for engagement, outreach, education. You know, the sensor stations themselves can be stewarded by volunteers, and habitat assessments are in a pretty engaging and conversational way to get people out there and understand ecosystems and our rivers much better. And then, of course, it quantifies the habitat and can be compared across agencies. The watershed ambassadors for the NJDEP go through this program. They collect data like this. The DEP themselves, every time they go out and monitor, does this habitat assessment. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the same in PA and the other states in the DRWI, but this is comparable data. It's not like everybody's doing this differently. It's the exact same form with the exact same categories, scored the exact same way within that subjective manner. And so you can go on things like WQX, the big data warehouses that house all this data. And I'm, you know, pretty sure that within somewhere around your area that the Watershed Ambassadors Program or other organizations have been out there and done these habitat assessments. So you could probably go back and look at habitat assessments 10, 15 years ago and compare it to the ones you're doing today and try and understand some of the trends that have happened in land use and land cover that are affecting your water quality that your sensor stations are reading. And so that's pretty much a summary. And I know that there'll be probably some discussion around this, so I wanted to leave a little bit of time for that. That's my email address. I do have slides and videos on how to do habitat assessments, and I will drop the videos link for the YouTube videos in the chat if you would like to learn how to do it on your own. And then, like I said, I know that MWA, many other watershed associations do these trainings, usually in conjunction with macroinvertebrates. So now is a really good time to start searching around in your local area to see if you can find an organization that does these trainings.
Awesome. Thank you, Krista. So we do have some questions, Krista.
Sure.
One, are you able to put in the chat a link to the actual assessment?
Yeah, I can do that.
And that is the high gradient assessment, which applies to most streams that folks are
Correct. There's two. It's high gradient and low gradient streams. So you're going to want to make sure you're using the right assessment tool.
Well,
Yeah.
what does high gradient, low gradient mean?
So those are EPA definitions as well. Basically, high gradient is anything in a more highlands area with a lot of cobble and stone. Low gradient, think of things like the lower Delaware. Lower Delaware is definitely a more low gradient, slower moving systems, mostly silt sand bottoms.
Thanks.
Carol, you had another question. Do you want to?
Yeah, it's just, I, mistyped a little bit there, but how strong is inter-rater reliability? And what I'm thinking about, is it good enough for a group to do a rapid habitat assessment of different sites on a stream for a synoptic sampling project? In other words, can you use a group of different people and then compare the different reaches of
Yeah,
that?
I mean, there's going to be some variability, but if you have the same trainer and if you go through, this at the same, like maybe it's different people, but if you have the same trainer and you have these discussions before you go out, and how that subjectivity, which way you lean on certain definitions of things, you're going to have that same perspective. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but it is pretty good when you're considering you're taking in the whole of the land use, land cover around and inside of the stream.
Mhm. And I guess I'll just throw my other question on there. Once you've done, say, 5 or 10 assessments, how, how long is it going to take to do an assessment at that point?
Yeah, my first assessment, my first 15 assessments, they probably took me hour, maybe even an hour and a half if a good discussion got going. But that's usually when you're out there with plenty of time, it's a nice day, and you really want to have philosophical discussions about the finer points of things. I can go out and do one in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Krista, how many stations does Musconetcong Watershed Association have now?
10.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Krista, I see you put a YouTube video in there, but can you send a link? Do you have a link that's directly to like a PDF of the sheet? I saw online you can get the whole manual and stuff, but I didn't know if there was like a specific, the original rapid bioassessment manual that
Let me look that up. I know that
okay.
I have it somewhere, and if I don't get to it by the end of this meeting, I'll email it, and you can just email it around to the group.
Who was that? Steve Tricarico asked for that. Yeah, it is online, Steve. It's just a matter of like, I don't know if there's an official spot for it or not. You can kind of find it here and there.
Yeah, I found it really easily when I.
Yeah, it's really very available. If you have it, Carol, just
Okay.
Yeah, just throw it in the chat.
Okay. Go back to you.
It's funny because I have this one person that is my team lead at one of my stations. It's down towards the bottom of the watershed and adjacent to a wildlife management area, so not a lot of change happens. And so he tells me, he told me one year, he's like, can't we just kind of skim over this? There's nothing changing. And I said, but that's valuable information too, to understand that there is no change. This is, you want to know that this restoration of having this wildlife management area here, basically preserved land, is keeping this in such a manner. So, it was a good point that he brought up. Why do we keep having to do this if nothing changes? Because no change is data too. So even if you have a station in one of those control locations, or what we call the more pristine kind of sites, that's valuable information too, because you could have your site in a really pristine location, but something change is happening upstream, and you start seeing the changes downstream, like sediment deposition, more embeddedness, and nothing's really going on in that habitat in the immediate 100 meters, that's an indicator to you to start looking further upstream, to maybe move those 100-meter reaches up and start doing those habitat assessments further upstream as well.
Okay.
I have a quick question, if I might.
Go for
So-
it.
You have a group do these assessments and agree on where it's gonna be. But then, you know, the next time you're out there, it's a different group of people. Would it be better perhaps if you have the same individual do it both times, at least the same reference? Would be, it's rank data, if you will, and you're
Right.
trying to average rank data, which statistically isn't really valid.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it is better to have the same person with the same perspectives and the same subjectivity within those categories to perform them, or at least the same person training these individuals, or a train of trainers, right? Like I have trained my field specialist, so he we agree on these definitions. And so therefore, I don't necessarily have to train everybody, but everybody that he trains now is going to have the same definitions locked in their head when they go out. So yes, having the same perspective within an organization so that at least within your organization, these habitat assessments are going to skew the subjective way that your definitions lean. So I get where you're coming from.
Thanks.
Yeah, and although there is subjectivity, I mean, these were designed to be used by, multiple people as it was, initially used for, a national protocol.
Yeah, with that, using that kind of subjectiveness on different groups, even if you have a similar trainer for some of the groups, you can't really compare one stream in Southeast Pennsylvania to a stream in Ohio or New York or somewhere that was trained, where the group was trained by somebody else. It's
Well, I mean, if they're
their
high
ranking,
gradient,
it's gonna be different.
if they're all high gradient, that it is designed to be able to have some level of comparison between, other high gradient systems. There is sort of a, plus or minus kind of error range there. And it may be sort of, you may not be able to get super precise with it. But I think there's, is an accuracy to it if you're really sort of trained and you're doing it according to protocol, which does try to, standardize the approach.
Yeah, no, we do it. We just did it with our macroinvertebrate sampling. We've done
You've been
it.
using that exact one, Pete?
Yes.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And every time we look at the stream, particularly a stream like Valley Creek, you go there this month and it's different than next month, so even though there might not have been any development in that particular area, the stream itself, due to high water events, does change quite a bit. And also the bank then changes as well.
Yeah.
Peter, does Trout Unlimited do trainings on this? The
Pardon?
Valley Forge Trout Unlimited, I mean?
Eric Soldorf from Delaware River Keepers did the training for us.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, I respect Krista. She says they're providing them twice a year at their watershed organization. And I was trained once by Mike Bullard, but, need to be retrained again. And as you keep pointing out, you need to have discussion and some sense of what the kind of interpretations of certain aspects are going to be. So I'm not sure where to get the training in Chester County.
Yeah, that would be a good resource to put out is in certain areas, who does training for macroinvertebrates and habitat assessment.
I know Master Watershed Stewards, so those of you who are here, did each of you have it in your class? training on this habitat assessment? Charlie said no. Yeah.
Yeah, I have not seen it in trainings. Kristen
She said no,
says
yeah.
no. Krista,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Not for Joe either.
I'm gonna ask Megan about it because that would be the perfect kind of venue for it.
It does bring up good points of discussion.
Mhm.
And, you know, to sort of Pete Hughes' point about just, you know, if you're going to a site, there is potential that you might evaluate a stream differently just based on changes at a particular site. You know, a bank collapses or something, but it's not due to like any grand change in the watershed. Now, these different storms are certainly going to be changing things around, and that is obviously something to consider. But you know, it's a semi-quantitative approach, so that's sort of inherent to the process.
And you know, we always do these too. We have our own sheet that is also characterizing what we see at the site every single time. What was the weather that day, right? Do we see any scum or oily layers on the top of the water? Is there a lot of woody debris? You know, things like this that is metadata to the data that helps us understand some of how these scores were formed as well. So I would definitely encourage you to have something like that. And then who the survey team was, right? So if you want to see why there's a wild fluctuation at one site and you see that every single time there's not one person that's the same, maybe there's something, you know, that needs to be fixed in your training process there. Like, why are you getting such a wild variation in your scores at the same site where not a lot of changes happen to that site? So having that metadata and an understanding of the conditions, you know, that you went, like, when was the date? Did you go out early March or was it in the middle of July? That could have an impact too, especially when you consider things like how much water is in the system.
Hey,
Can I ask one more question? From a very pragmatic point of view, so not theoretical, but pragmatic, do you really think it's best to do it near a sensor station as opposed to when you don't have that data to compare it or to look at it with? Do you think that's just really helpful to do
Yeah,
that? So
it's
helpful
pairing land use with water quality, and that's always helpful.
that you don't even bother to do it if you don't have that?
Oh, no, I do them at sites I don't have sensor stations. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mhm.
so Steve Tricarico put in the fish
Yeah, right. The fish protocol.
protocol. Steve, what was your point with that?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Kind of working a hybrid here on different microphone and different speakers. Anyway, just to let you know, in terms of Master Watershed Steward Program, we were not trained in the EPA one, but after we graduated, at least Penn State Extension had put this out, which it looks like it might be similar to the one that the EPA has, but we did not get the EPA training.
It's a lot shorter. It's definitely less detailed though.
Oh, I'm in no way saying this is detailed. This is, I mean, it is really meant to be a rapid assessment. It's something that's quick and easy, especially if you're going out and doing a lot of other monitoring. You know, for each one of these categories, you can dig in, you know, just looking at substrate, you know, I know when we do dam removals, we do the habitat assessment, but we also do a very in-depth pebble count, which is basically going and characterizing the grain size of the entire substrate. with a gravelometer by literally walking an entire 100 meters, picking up, you know, every single grain that your toe touches every other step in a zigzag pattern. It's called the Woolman method. So, you know, it depends on what the goal is and how much effort you want to put into these things. But these are just a really quick and easy way to characterize the immediate area around where you're taking other samples or where you're putting in restoration or needing to know if restoration is needed. You know, you can do transects of plants on each bank to try and understand your plant communities, to understand how many invasives are there, if you're going to need invasive removals before you go in and put trees in, for survivability rates. So each one of these can definitely be looked at way more in depth.
Okay, any other topics, questions? Okay. Well, I may as well take this time to share my screen and go to a few final slides here. As I mentioned, there's mentors available if anyone needs assistance with stations. Feel free to be in touch with us at Stroud as well. As I mentioned earlier, for any type of monitoring or data analysis or type questions, issues. Next meeting is Thursday, April 18th. That is going to be a presentation by Keith Fritchie. Keith is with, used to be with New Jersey Trout Unlimited. He worked with Krista, worked with Ian, has worked with the Stroud Center on some stuff. He is now in Vermont, but it's sort of staying tuned in to what's going on in these parts. And Keith is going to be talking about water temperature in prep for sort of summer hot season. So that is everything. And I will stop share and say thank you. And if anyone has anything they want to talk, oh no, stop share, and I will stop recording as well. Thanks.